subject of my special order.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, tonight I rise with several of my colleagues to honor the work and memory of Congressman Bill Frenzel, who passed away on Monday. Congressman Frenzel represented Minnesota's 3rd Congressional District for 20 years, first elected in 1970 and retiring in 1990. Actually, Mr. Speaker, many of us tonight had already planned to speak today to express our love and appreciation to Bill from this floor, even before we learned of his death. And so now it just feels too late in a way. But one of the benefits of extolling the virtues of people greater than ourselves is that we become better still, and so we're keeping with that plan tonight. I must admit, Mr. Speaker, and my colleagues, that as I stand here in this chamber where Bill did some of his best work, that my heart is more full of emotions than my head is full of ideas. And there are many facts that I could recite about the service of Bill Frenzel, but instead I'm going to try to capture the man that I knew, the man that we all knew, and the man that we all truly loved and respected. When I received the news that Bill had passed away on Monday, there was a scrap of paper hanging on my wall in my Washington office and also a scrap of paper hanging on my Minnesota office wall that became my prized possessions. They are 2 vintage Frenzel doodles. There are hundreds of them out there, whimsical, fantastically detailed little drawings that Bill Frenzel did while he was on the phone, while he was in committee meetings, listening to testimony or doing debates. Such was the hyperactivity of this brilliant man, of this brilliant mind, that when he was required to sit still, his drawing hand had to be moving. And I say that just to convey the idea that Bill Frenzel was just more alive than most people that you meet. He was always thinking, he was always creating, he was always pushing positive ideas. And in the interactions that I had with him, it was like he was always leaning forward at you at an angle, like a person walking boldly into a stiff wind. Bill Frenzel was a serious legislator, often poring over line by line of the federal budget. In fact, that practice continued after he left Congress. Every year, he would make a phone call to my office requesting his copy of the annual federal budget. And it's amazing to me that anyone would even want this massive document sitting on their bookshelf. But what is truly amazing is that Bill would actually go through this budget line by line for decades after he left this institution. Bill believed in and dedicated his life to doing the greatest good for the greatest number of people. And for Bill, the way that he did the greatest good for the greatest number of people was promoting and advancing international trade. I suppose it began by looking at the great good being done around the world by many outstanding companies that operate out of the district that we represent in Minnesota, companies that feed and restore health to millions and billions all across the borders of the world. Bill believed, and he was absolutely right, that there is no force in the modern world that has done more to raise people out of poverty, to foster the spread of human right, or to expand democracy than international trade. Within Bill's own lifetime, the United States and Germany and Japan were mortal enemies, doing terrible violence to each other's lands and peoples. But through the experience of being trading partners, they have become our best friends and our best allies. For 3 decades, there was no stronger advocate for international trade that was more persuasive than Congressman Bill Frenzel. He was the indispensable man in many ways in the passage of the North American Free Trade Agreement, which has benefited all the people of our continent immeasurably and has been the model of our agreements now for all over the world. Just last month in October, Bill received the Mexican Order of the Aztec Eagle. That's the highest honor of the nation of Mexico that can be given to a non-citizen in appreciation for his work on the North American Free Trade Agreement. In 2000, he also received the Order of the Rising Sun, Gold, and Silver Star from the Emperor of Japan for his efforts to advance trade and the U.S. relationship with Japan. He deserves America's highest honors as well. He worked across the aisle as a consensus seeker because he understood that relationships matter, that relationships make a difference, especially on the big issues like Social Security reform, budget reform, tax reform, welfare reform, and, of course, trade agreements. And after retiring from Congress in 1991, he became a guest scholar in economic studies at the Brookings Institution, and he remained very active in public policy, being appointed to governmental panels by both presidents on both sides of the aisle. Just 2 months ago, in fact, in September, President Obama reappointed him to the White House Advisory Committee for Trade Policy and Negotiations. That's a position that he was first appointed to by President George W. Bush in the year 2002. He also co-chaired the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget, a bipartisan organization dedicated to educating the public about the impact of fiscal policies. And I will just tell you personally, Mr. Speaker and members, that I will miss my conversations with Bill Frenzel that I got together with him every 3 or 4 months over coffee, where he would share his years of wisdom, his experiences, his insights that he gained during that tenure in public service. There's no doubt that he was a good friend and a mentor in many respects. However, there's no temptation for any of us to try to do a Bill Frenzel imitation, because there will never be another like him. For me, Bill absolutely inspires me to be the best that I can be and search for ways that I can do the greatest good to help the greatest number of people. I offer my condolences tonight, Mr. Speaker, to the Frenzel family, to his wife, Ruthie, who was always by his side, to his 3 daughters, Debbie, Pam, and Mitty. I also want to give thanks to Minnesota's 3rd Congressional District voters for electing him in the first place and for giving me an amazing set of shoulders to try to stand upon, as well as my thanks to God for the life and service and the example of Congressman Bill Frenzel. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to yield time to the Congressman from the 8th Congressional District, Mr. Rick Nolan. Congressman Nolan has a very unique perspective on his friendship with Bill Frenzel, serving with him both in Congress as well as in the state legislature in Minnesota. And I will just say that as 2 public servants of Minnesota for a number of years, both in and out of office, their paths crossed many times. And their friendship exemplifies, I think, Bill's friendly nature and willingness to work with people on both sides of the aisle and get things done for their country and our state. I yield to the gentleman.
Thank you. Thank you, Representative Paulsen, and thank you for helping to organize this tribute to a truly great native son of Minnesota who made us all so proud in so many ways that, as you said, Eric, it's hard to enumerate all of them. When it came to public service, when it came to governance, when it came to bipartisanship, when it came to doodling, when it came to baseball, I mean, the list just goes on and on. And he truly made us proud in so many ways. And I too want to recognize other friends of the Frenzel family who are here. As you said, Bill and Ruthie were inseparable. They were clearly a team, and that can be so valuable and so important to the success of a legislator, a great public servant. And Bill was so proud of his family, and the girls, Debbie and Pam and Mitty, talked about them often. And I want to thank the family for being there for Bill and giving him the strength to carry on and to do all the great things that he did. As Eric mentioned, we served together in the State House of Representatives. Bill had been there before me. I followed him to the Congress. Again, obviously he'd been there before me, but he was always such a good friend, offering all kinds of guidance and help negotiating the ways of the State House and the state and the ways of the U.S. House and the ways of the government here. Just a wonderfully good friend and a good mentor that I shall always be forever grateful for his mentoring and his guidance. And that was something he did for anyone who had the good judgment to take advantage of it, because he was always open. He was always available. He was always there for you. And he was always so incredibly well prepared. But the thing I liked most about Bill was that he was so respectful of everyone else and their ideas. And you knew if you had an idea, whether it was a good one or a bad one, you were going to get a hearing with Bill Frenzel. And if it was a bad idea, of course, he'd be the first to tell you and tell you why. And quite frankly, more often than not, he was right. And that was just such an important lesson that he gave to all of us and inspired us all. When it came to things like Eric mentioned, the budget, most members, will maybe read the summary. Bill Frenzel, he read that thing in its entirety. and he knew where every nickel and every dime was going, and he understood the consequences of it. When it came to trade policy, same thing. He knew all of its implications. He understood international trade. In fact, Eric, in many ways, he was an inspiration for me outside of politics as well, in no small measure to the benefits that he articulated to trade. Because when I left this Congress, some 34 years ago, I went into export trading because I'd heard Bill Frenzel talk about the incredible opportunity that we had with our technology, our ability to produce food, our ability to produce good consumer goods, our ability to produce things that improve the lives of people all over the world, and why not get out there and aggressively export those goods and those services, which is what I ended up doing for 32 years before I had the weak moment and came back to this institution. No, I'm just kidding. I'm delighted and thrilled to be back here. And for Bill Frenzel, I feel so much better prepared than I was, quite frankly, when I served years ago, thanks in no small part to Bill Frenzel. And when it came to the rules of the House, Bill understood, the importance of the integrity of this institution as well, better than anyone. And I suspect Bill would be on the floor here today from time to time, calling for the reestablishment of regular order. Because Bill was never afraid of anyone else's idea. In fact, he welcomed them. And Bill and I and others, we served in a time when if anyone had a good idea, they could offer it to the rest of the chamber in the form of an amendment. And we could debate it, and we could argue it. And we did it in committee, in full committee. We did it in conference committee. And Bill Frenzel understood that that was the foundation. That was the foundation of bipartisanship. That was the foundation of a Congress that was effectively governing and getting things done. And that was perhaps, his greatest contribution to all of us. Because only through that process do we get to know one another and build respect for one another and learn where those areas for common agreement and fixing things and getting things done comes from. And we have Bill Frenzel to thank for that. And I'd be remiss if we didn't talk about his doodling. It was amazing. You'd be in a committee or you'd be in a hearing and Bill would be busy doodling away. You'd think he wasn't paying any attention at all. And suddenly he would rise and he'd have a question. And it was like the best question that anybody asked. He obviously, he had a two-track brain. One hand was doodling, but boy, he never missed a thing. He never missed a thing. And that was Bill Frenzel. And speaking of those doodles, and boy, they're treasured. To have a Bill Frenzel, a doodle that's been autographed, in this town, that's like having a Picasso, these were great doodlies, as you've seen, the intricacy and the geometry and the creativity of them. It's just amazing. And how he could do that was amazing as well. And, of course, he was a great Minnesota sports fan. One of the stars on the Republican baseball team. And, of course, he loved Minnesota sports, the Vikings, the Twins, the North Stars, you name it. And he always showed up in those games with his Minnesota Twins jersey on, And they used to win a lot of games back in the day. Then Marty Sable came along and started managing the Democrats, and things turned on him. But Bill was a great ball player. He loved Minnesota. He loved Minnesota sports, and just a wonderfully good friend. As I said in the beginning, whether it was governing, whether it was baseball, whether it was doodling, whether it was family, whether it was bipartisanship, advising presidents, welcoming new members, advising and helping others. There was just no greater mentor, no greater public servant than Minnesota ever had in the wonderful Bill Frenzel. And his life will continue to be an inspiration for all of us going forward. And truly, our state, our nation is a better place for Bill Frenzel. And his inspiration will enable all of us to continue that great tradition forward and continue to make this great nation of ours a better place to live. Thank you, Mr. Speaker and fellow members, for the opportunity to stand here and pay homage to a great Minnesotan and a great public servant for our state and our nation.
Well,
Thank you.
I thank the gentleman for sharing his perspective and his stories, some fond memories, and appreciate that very much. I know the family does as well. And next I would like to yield to the gentleman from Maryland, the Minority Whip Steny Hoyer, who served for a decade, Mr. Speaker, with Bill Frenzel until Bill retired in 1991. And that relationship continued after Bill's retirement, as both had a passion for working on the federal budget, bridging the gap between Republicans and Democrats when it comes to our country's spending and tax policies. And Congressman Hoyer, I think, often pointed out Bill's willingness to put all things on the table when it comes to our budget to find common ground with his counterparts on the other side of the aisle. I'm happy to yield to the gentleman.
I thank my friend, Congressman Paulsen, who represents the district that Bill Frenzel represented. I came here, Mr. Speaker, in 1981. Bill Frenzel was a member of Congress at that point in time, and as Congressman Paulsen has pointed out, we served together for the following 10 years. But as he also pointed out, we continued to work thereafter because of joint interests that we had. I think Congressman Nolan caught the essence of Bill Frenzel very well, and I would associate myself with his remarks. But I would also add that the American people want us to work together. What I have said since the election is, look, all 435 of us share two things in common. One, we are all Americans. Secondly, our people all sent us here to make America better. Those two things we share in common. And we share the expectations of the American people that we will do that which we can agree on together, and not allow that on which we do not agree to undermine our ability to work on that on which we do agree. Bill Frenzel got that message. Bill Frenzel lived that kind of life. Bill Frenzel was that kind of member of Congress. Bill Frenzel could be pretty sharp. I don't mean bright, I mean sharp-tongued. If he thought you were going off, as Congressman Nolan said, in the wrong direction. I'm happy to say that I was never the object of that, but Bill Frenzel wanted you to, A, be candid, be straightforward, be intellectually honest, and not play games. And he was prepared and, in fact, did the same. Bill Frenzel, in his private life, working with Brookings, continued his public life's commitment to rational, responsible government. And as Congressman Paulsen pointed out, I am a very big advocate of fixing our debt, fixing it in many ways through the kind of policies that Bill Frenzel recommended. Policies which say to both sides, look, we both have interests. We've got to accommodate those interests, but we've got to accommodate a bottom line. Be real, in other words. Bill Frenzel was a Republican. I'm a Democrat. But we were first Americans. And I felt it a great honor to learn from Bill Frenzel, to respect his intellect and his insights, and to respect the quality of his service and his willingness to work with others to do what the American people expect all of us to do, make their country better. So I rise to join Mr. Paulsen, asked to revise and extend my remarks, rise with Mr. Paulsen to honor an American who served his country well, an American of whom we can all be proud, of which his family clearly is proud, and rightfully so. But his colleagues were proud of him on both sides of the aisle. I want to say to his wife, Ruth, we send our sympathies. But we share with you that pride in Bill Frenzel's contribution to his country, to this institution and to each of us. And I yield back the balance of my time.
I thank the gentleman for offering his perspective as well and those unique stories and reflections from a bipartisan basis on a truly great American, as Mr. Hoyer had mentioned. With that, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to yield to my colleague and gentleman from Texas, good friend Kevin Brady, who's a very distinguished member of the House Ways and Means Committee. He's also the former chairman and a member of the Subcommittee on Trade. Congressman Brady is another member of Congress that benefited greatly from the wealth of wisdom that Bill Frenzel imparted on important issues like trade and the federal budget. I know I can speak for many members of the Ways and Means Committee when I say that the work that Bill did at the Brookings Institution, as well as the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget, has been beneficial to all of us. And I yield to the gentleman.
Well, Congressman Paulsen, thank you for allowing me to join you tonight. I rise tonight to honor our late colleague and friend Bill Frenzel, who faithfully and with great distinction served the constituents of Minnesota for 20 years, and I would say served his country for a lifetime. As you can tell from my accent, I'm not from Minnesota. I'm from Texas. And I had a chance to meet Bill when I started on the Ways and Means Committee, where I now serve with Mr. Paulsen, who's one of our, frankly, most respected members, and his predecessor, Jim Ramstad, as well, all following in the Bill Frenzel mold. When I started on Ways and Means, I just came quickly to appreciate his willingness to share his vast wealth of knowledge on trade issues, big and small. You know, and even though he was no longer an elected official, I was always struck by Bill's just endless willingness to give of himself, of finding ways to advance the cause of free trade and economic freedom throughout the world. I think it's important to note that historically in Congress, trade has always been a bipartisan issue, Republicans and Democrats working together. And throughout his career, Bill's constructive work across the aisle exemplified the best of this ideal. Everyone knew he was open to new ideas, was a straight shooter, respected others, and worked hard to get people to come and arrive at a consensus. Quite simply, Bill was elected to do a job, and he just wanted to get things done. And boy, did he get things done in the trade world, from working on GATT to the Uruguay round, normal trading relations with China, NAFTA, helping set the foundation for the World Trade Organization. Bill was at the center of the trade world as a respected member of Congress and as a thought leader on international trade when he retired from public life. The truth is, Bill Frenzel believed in economic freedom. He believed in our right to buy and sell and compete around the world with as little government interference as possible. He believed families should have choices, that no government anywhere should decide what's on that grocery shelf and what price you paid for. That was your choice. That was your economic freedom. He knew that while America was free, we would see so many America need not apply signs around the world, and he knew if he tore them down and gave our American businesses and workers, our Minnesota businesses and workers, a chance to compete, in fact, we would not just grow customers around the world, we'd grow jobs here at home. And so his leadership on trade, his fingerprints on all things trade, can be found not only here in the United States, but in foreign capitals around the world, where his counsel was sought by many and he was respected by all. Bill's contributions to our nation, to this body, will always be remembered, and he leaves a towering trade legacy on which we can all build economic prosperity for generations to come. I hope his family understands how special he is to so many of us that you may not have known before, but we all consider ourselves Bill's fans and friends. And with that, I yield back my time.
Well, I thank the gentleman. As he mentioned, the members of the Ways and Means Committee absolutely do look at Bill Frenzel as an important role model and inspiration as we look to tackle continued problems and opportunities down the road. With that, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to yield to my colleague from Minnesota, Mr. Ellison, who's another member, like Bill, who's committed to serving the people of Minnesota in the 5th Congressional District, his constituents. Bill Frenzel, as was mentioned, was always someone that was willing to work across the aisle to get things done and accomplish here in Washington. I think all of us in the Minnesota delegation are thankful for the example set by Bill for working together. We see that example still today. I know I've worked with Congressman Ellison on some similar issues for our constituents back home, and I think that we can thank Bill Frenzel for setting that spirit of cooperation that preceded us both. With that, I yield to the gentleman.
I do thank the gentleman from yielding. Congressman Paulsen, appreciate you holding down this special order tonight. And I think it's absolutely true that all of us owe a debt of gratitude to people who walked before us, even if we never had the pleasure of knowing them and meeting them. And I am one who believes I owe Bill Frenzel, even though I never had the opportunity to get to know him. But it doesn't matter, because Bill Frenzel served the people of the state of Minnesota. He got up every day. He did his best by them. He has a reputation for reading the bills, understanding the issues, arguing with passion for values that he held in the best interests of the people who he represented. And for that, I always have to take my hat off to a man such as Bill Frenzel. Bill Frenzel made a good reputation for members of Congress who would come to Minnesota before I ever got here. Before I ever got here, people like Bill Frenzel made it so that our colleagues would greet us and expect us to be thoughtful, hardworking, like he was, because he laid down that path before we ever got here. So I have had the pleasure of reading about Bill Frenzel since he left us for his reward, and I knew well of him before that. But I will simply say that there are many people in this world who we owe a great gratitude to, who've paved a way and carved a path for us, who we never had a chance to thank personally. And as a man who believes in reality beyond this one, I just hope that Bill Frenzel knows that I'm grateful to him, and I thank him for his great service while here. And I yield back.
Well, I thank the gentleman, because those words he mentioned about being hardworking and thoughtful certainly reflect Bill Frenzel's spirit, which we need to continue to embody on this House floor. And next, I'd like to yield to the Congresswoman, my colleague and good friend, the representative from Minnesota's 6th Congressional District, Michelle Bachmann. Somebody who, like me, has served after Bill Frenzel's congressional career came to a conclusion, but has benefited also, I think, from Bill's service. As we know, she will also be leaving our delegation and retiring from Congress, and we're thankful for her service to Minnesota. I know that she will look to the example that was also set by Bill Frenzel and stay very active and involved in public policy issues that face our country, even after her House tenure comes to an end soon. With that, I yield to the gentleman.
I want to say thank you to my wonderful colleague, Erik Paulsen, who has exemplified the spirit of Bill Frenzel in the 3rd Congressional District seat. And it really is because our former colleague, Bill Frenzel, set a standard. We'd like to think in Minnesota that we're a trendsetter and that we've often called ourselves the brain power state. Well, could the brain power state have ever been better exemplified than by a man like Bill Frenzel? He really was a thinking man's person. He also was an individual who was completely willing to open himself to new ideas from other members. And I think it's very evident from the members that we heard from this evening on both sides of the aisle that this was a complete unfettered outpouring of not just admiration, but love and appreciation for what this man did. And as Representative Paulsen had just said, I will too soon be leaving this House floor. This will be one of the last speeches that I ever give from this privileged well. There is no greater bastion of a few square yards of freedom than this area. We're allowed to do this. I'm allowed to speak here tonight because I was privileged to be given an election certificate, just like Bill Frenzel. He earned the trust. And he earned the admiration, and Bill earned the respect of the people in the 3rd District. And one thing I can tell you, Bill Frenzel never disappointed. He kept faith with those who gave him that election certificate. I know when I first ran for Congress, it was in 2006. I began the journey a little bit before then. And as I was in Minnesota, usually all of us made our way over to the 3rd Congressional District because in the 3rd Congressional District resided a lot of the people who paid for the campaigns in the state of Minnesota. And everyone knew Bill Frenzel. And so I would meet and have lunch and breakfast and dinner and lunch and breakfast and dinner and coffees with people in the 3rd Congressional District. When it came to finding those who wanted to get behind efforts in Minnesota in running for campaigns on either side of the aisle, it was usually out of the 3rd Congressional District. And this is what I want the family who this evening, for those who are watching across the nation on C-SPAN, it's important to know that Bill was so highly loved. His family is here this evening. They are joined here in the gallery, and they're able to hear what every family needs to hear. Yes, there's sorrow at the passing of a loved one, but there's also great joy. Joy that is made in reliving memories of those we admired, those we served with, those that we loved. And it's good to remember them forever. It helps deepen in our memory book the importance of what this life meant. Bill's meant something. Bill's contributed. Bill was a positive force for good, not just for the 3rd District, not just for Minnesota, but for the nation. And it was his character, first of all. That's what I want the family to know. When I sat down and coffee after coffee, breakfast after breakfast, inevitably, Bill's name came up. I'm sure that Erik Paulsen would agree. Bill's name came up. Why? Because people would say to me, Michelle, you know Bill Frenzel, don't you? Bill is a friend of mine. I heard that over and over and over. Bill is a friend of mine. He was a respected colleague, yes. A thinker, yes. But he was people's friends. And so people would always speak with Bill in the terms of raising the bar and setting a standard. And I hope that I was able to live up to that standard of a Bill Frenzel for my brief 8 years in Congress. I give Bill a lot of credit. He served for 8 years in the Minnesota House of Representatives. He served for 20 years here in the United States Congress. Think of that. 28 years of public service? That's amazing. I was able to put 8 here. Think of 20 years here pouring out his life on behalf of this nation. It really is an accomplishment. And to think that during all of those years, it wasn't that Bill just had 1 good year or 2 good years. Bill had 20 great, fabulous years that not only can the family be proud of, but that our nation and as a fellow Minnesotan and successor colleague, I'm proud of. I also just briefly want to mention one thing that Bill also did for his nation is that he was willing to lay down his life when he served our country in the Navy. He was a veteran, and I'm thankful for what he did. The Holy Scriptures say, "Greater love hath no man than this, but that he would lay down his life for his friends." Bill Frenzel willingly put himself on the line so that he could do that. Thank goodness his life wasn't required, and he came back to serve in this distinguished body. And as a distinguished man, he singularly served this body. And so with great humility, I want to say again to Ruthie, to the 3 girls, to the grandchildren, be so proud of the legendary Bill Frenzel. His name will not be forgotten in this institution. His work won't be forgotten in this institution. And as one who's about to depart, I can tell you, you think about that. Did what I did here, did it matter? The speeches I gave, the work I did, the late nights, the early morning, the weekends, the sacrifices that he made, and the sacrifices that you as a family made. Bill would be the first one to say, I couldn't have done this without Ruthie. I couldn't have done this without the girls. I couldn't have done it without those who loved me. He would be the one to say that. So I thank you to the family, Mr. Speaker, who is in the gallery, for what you did to support this legendary man, because he made a distinct contribution, and he couldn't have done it without you making that sacrifice. So I'm very grateful for what they did. And I thank God our country is a better place because of Bill Frenzel. And I yield back to my distinguished colleague from the 3rd District.
Well, I thank my colleague, and as you mentioned, he was a veteran, a public servant, a thinker, and opening himself to new ideas and certainly offering new ideas himself. And And there is sadness, but as you mentioned, great joy as we reflect on the opportunities to be a role model to help others. So I thank the gentlelady for her comments tonight. Mr. Speaker, I also want to note that several members were unable to attend and be with us on the floor tonight, but they will be submitting statements for the record. These members include Congressman Paul Ryan from Wisconsin. He's the next chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, and although their time in Congress did not overlap, I know that Congressman Ryan valued his friendship with Bill Frenzel and often sought his counsel on trade and other matters while he was still learning his ropes on the Ways and Means Committee. In fact, when we had our coffees together, he would often reflect and ask questions about Congressman Ryan and his future. Congressman Dave Camp, the current chair of the Ways and Means Committee as well, may offer some comments. We had a conversation earlier today and also reflected on the contributions that our colleague, former colleague Bill Frenzel had made to the institution of the Ways and Means Committee. So, Mr. Speaker, on Monday, we lost a true leader, a true role model, who represented the absolute and very best in public service. Bill Frenzel was a statesman who continues to be an inspiration in many ways to the folks on this body and this House floor and all of those who continue to be focused on issues like tax reform, welfare reform, budget reform, and advancing a trade agenda and economic freedom throughout the world. And so tonight, as we close noting that we are honoring an American that contributed greatly to giving the greatest good to the greatest number of people. I yield back the balance of my time.